on the scene. He's got the voice that's mean, asking those questions that you never seen. He's got that fire, burning bright and clean. Andrew Keane, making waves, break the routine on the Keen On show. He brings the heat, asking the minds, digging deep till they bleed. No sugar-coated truths, no lies to deceive. Andrew Keane, the master of the interview beat. He's got the knowledge, he's got the flair, challenging ideas with a fearless stare. With every question, he's uncovering what's there. Andrew Keane, a truth seeker, he's aware.
Hello, everybody. We live in the age, of course, of AI, and alongside AI, a general hysteria about how we're going to survive, how we're going to work in an age of smart machines. In fact, over the last couple of weeks, there are 6 new books on AI in the workplace. Everyone seems to be obsessing over it, including my guest today, Matt Beane, who teaches at UC Santa Barbara and is the author of an interesting new book, The Skill Code: How to Save Human Ability in an Age of Intelligent Machines. Matt is joining us from Santa Barbara in Southern California. Matt, this word human is always used in all these AI books, and I'm always a bit skeptical of what people mean by it. What do you mean by human ability in your book, The Skill Code?
It's a proxy for skill. Skill is the ability for, in this case, a human, but actually I talk about human and non-human in the book. But skill is the ability to get results under pressure reliably. Full stop.
And can machines do that?
Yes, absolutely. Well, in fact, Archimedes tells us that. You could go back before then. He said, "Give me a lever long enough, I'll move the whole world." Right? A piece of wood is a machine handled properly, and that can produce results reliably under pressure. Sure. So yeah, I don't think ability is something that is unique to humans up and until now more in history, and we haven't dramatically crossed this Rubicon yet. The only source of initiation for an action that could get results is a human. Once a human sets a water wheel in motion, it can continue to produce results, but a human's got to be there to maintain it. So agency, like where does the sort of impetus for action come from so far? Up and until now, that's a human mostly.
Matt, there are many optimists, perhaps even utopians, who believe that in the future, machines will do all our dirty work, that we'll be free, as Marx famously said in the middle of the 19th century, to write poetry in the afternoon and novels in the evening and farm in the morning. Why should we want to save human ability? Why shouldn't we get intelligent machines to do all our work for us?
Yeah, so the operative term in that sentence is all. And what counts as work? Work is anything that produces a valuable result. So let me just take a few easy results to examples there to just shoot that idea down. So inventing new ideas, including ways of treating people with respect, is work. That takes mental effort. It takes collaborative interaction and so on. And so there are certainly some work products, new invention, or a new form of social organization, and so on, that you might want to look at and think, well, no matter whether it could be automated or not, we would prefer to do it. That's to put aside whether or not humans need to work in ways that produce value for others to be healthy. And I think that throughout the skill code in the book, that you can take that read on, because of course the book is focused on skill. That's my career is focused on skill. But the broad swathe of research that I draw in the book, you could just as well take a fair chunk of that and read it as very strong evidence that work is integral to a meaningful human life. In fact, maybe even a physically healthy human life, mentally healthy human life. So anyway, it's not at all obvious practically to me that we would want to automate all. People quickly throw in that word all, when in fact, really, I mean, what humanity's been about for the longest period of time, millennia, is automate that work which is readily automatable at reasonable cost and that is quite noxious for humans to perform. We tend to go to that square first, since the pyramids, since before. And or places where we can achieve superhuman results dramatically. And we invented the bow 160,000 years ago. And that's because you could get, you could store energy in a weapon and get it to do superhuman things. So,
or what at least appeared to be superhuman. David Graeber, the great anthropologist, wrote a book about bullshit jobs. The subtitle of your book, the Skill Code, is about saving human ability rather than jobs. Should we be concerned? Is human ability and human jobs, are they the same thing? Or you're in the Graeber camp that most people who work today are doing jobs which are bullshit, which they don't really do very much, and there's no essential value both in intellectual or even economic terms?
Yeah, no, it would be easy for me to have a beer with him should he be inclined and to agree with almost everything. And I certainly read his book.
Around, of course, he's no longer alive. But
oh, right. Anyway, so whether or not the job quality is sufficiently high in the world is a well-established fact. We know that it is not. So many knowledge work jobs, sort of in the clerical middle of the economy, that have to do with pushing bits of information around and reconfiguring them, or administrative tasks, and a fair amount of service jobs now, and a fair amount of physical jobs are dirty, dangerous, dull. That's the sort of holy trinity for automators. And demean the humans involved, de-skill them over time, and so on. There's an entire, very well empirically researched tradition, it's about 80 years old now, on good jobs. The 70s is really when that started to take off. And it's just plainly evident that there are not enough good jobs in the world, far too many not good. BS jobs is a subset of not good jobs. But regardless, that is intertwined with this question of skills and abilities versus jobs. And people often worry about jobs going away, when you're absolutely right. Many of them, up close and personal, would we want any human? They turn humans into robots, put it that way, rather than the other way around. And on the other side, it's not obvious we want to keep all the jobs we have, even if they were all good. In many cases, we could put technology to work in a way that would eliminate a fair amount of work, and yes, jobs. And for some people, that's very bad news in the short run. And that should be acknowledged. But for a healthy economy, for an innovative species, one that has a sustainable future, a brighter future, we probably should be destroying a fair number of jobs every year. The bugbear in the economy is not the destruction of jobs, I think. I mean, that's what's in the book. It's that we are changing jobs at a rate that requires us to learn and build new skills to deal with change within our jobs, right when we are threatening the process that we all implicitly rely on for building new skill, an informal process that's built into any reasonable job.
You teach at UC Santa Barbara, one of the most attractive campuses in the world, I think. You're an assistant professor of technology management, whatever that is. Some people believe that universities, whether it's the UCs or private universities, they're not really doing a great job developing human skills. What do you think? Are universities the problem here or the solution? Or not just universities, schools?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm very overt about this in the book. Knowledge is something that's very different than skills, by the way. And we tend to conflate them. And knowledge is necessary increasingly to participate in the modern world of work. You have to understand the game, so to speak. But all it is table stakes. The relative proportion of your experience in any university anywhere, except for trade schools, apprenticeship style schools or practical schools of engineering and so on, the ratio between knowledge and skill is very skewed in favor of knowledge. And that can be all well and good. However, the bulk of what we build in terms of skill happens after any formal school that we take. And by the way, this includes any corporate training or organizational training, right? These are all focused on sort of showing up in some sort of classroom, digital, not, consuming a bunch of information and coming to understand a thing, maybe taking a test. But does that mean you can reliably do the thing under pressure? No, of course not. And so, no, right? I mean, the opening salvo in the book is an epigraph from one of my sort of intellectual heroes, Anthony Bourdain. And he said, with great respect to my professors, I believe I've learned more in kitchens than any school could ever hold. That's the sort of working theory of the book. We've misfocused ourselves on what produces skill. We assume it's school. Everybody seems to, especially in the States, we have this myth that going to school will leave you with skill. And it is just patently obvious from the research that we humans learn by doing along someone who knows more. And it's not filled with training materials, reading books, even a lot of talk necessarily. And we must flip our investment in that regard. We have to start investing in understanding and building out this taken for granted learning by collaboration process.
I know you've got the 3 C's, learning by collaboration. Your book focuses on different skill sets, whether it's a plumber, an attorney, a teacher, a surgeon. Taking a plumber and a surgeon, I mean, one plumbs a toilet, one plumbs, I guess, the human body as a surgeon. Do most jobs or activities, do they require the same kind of skill set, or what you call a skill code? A plumber, a surgeon, a doctor, a lorry driver? Are we all as humans in the same skill business?
Yes, that's the firm claim in the book. That's what made me feel like it was worth writing. The claim there is not that we all need the same skills to do our job, but the same 3 conditions need to be in healthy supply in order for anyone to build skill in any job. That's what the skill code is. It doesn't specify the skills. It just says what needs to be true about your work experience such that as you go through it, you build more skill over time. That's the 3 C's in the book. Challenge. We need to work near the edge of our capability. The particulars matter. Complexity, which is you don't just get good at a focused thing. You have to broaden your palette of skills and knowledge as you grow. And connection, which is bonds of trust and respect between humans. We don't often think of human relationships as having much to do with whether we get good at something. But in fact, you cannot get good at something very well without bonds of trust and respect. Those show up differently. The criteria for how those need to manifest in healthy supply are listed in the book. But yes, plumber, bomb disposal technician, semiconductor chip engineer, podcaster, academic. The path to skill the code for the skill is the same.
Matt, I don't want to make this a conversation about Donald Trump because it's boring. Everyone's talking about him all the time. But how would you explain him then? He's clearly a remarkably skillful politician, but he's obnoxious. He's offensive. He fires everyone around him. How does Trump work in terms of your skill code?
Right. Don't have the data to know.
What do you mean you don't? You don't need the data, Matt. You just need to watch television or follow him on Twitter.
Well, so that's the difference between, I disagree with that assumption. The way that I do my research is I show up to a workplace and I gather, say, a year and a half of firsthand observational data on how things actually work day in, day out for hours on end, hundreds, thousands of hours. That's the corpus of data I need to make any claim about how skill gets built in any one setting, let alone many. And so for me to understand Joe Biden, Trump, any public figure's capability, which is reliable skill under pressure. I grant you, by the way, breathtaking skill in certain regards, maybe best in class. what were the conditions that allowed that skill to flourish? Sure, there's tons of secondary data available. I go for primary data that I gather through my own eyes and typing really fast. And so I assume that there must have been some condition that, in fact, if you took the 3 C's in this book and you applied them and you had the primary data, it would help you explain it. But I don't have it.
If you did have this, where would you look if you had access to Trump and you could follow him around all day for 10,000 hours or whatever, however much time you need to get the data? What would you be looking for with him?
Right. So if the thesis of the book is correct, you're going to be looking for to the extent to which he had healthy challenge to build his capabilities. In other words, working close to the edge of his capabilities such that he was not performing at his best and was utterly focused, and then had time to recoup from being near that edge, but not beyond it and not below it. Now, there's another thing to say about this whole situation, because, by the way, I do studies on exceptions to rules all the time. And in fact, there is no one theory of anything that accounts for everything. And there are always exceptions that prove the rule, right? So I talk about in the chapter on connection, bonds of trust and respect. The publicly available data would make you think maybe those didn't feature in the same way in Donald Trump's journey to skill as they did for others. But Devil Wears Prada style mentorship, we like to celebrate that. We like to think that being caustic and difficult and having high pressure, sort of no support, intense challenge is good for skill development. But for the mean, the research is just super clear on that in fact, humans flourish in their journey towards skill when there are bonds of trust, warm bonds of trust and respect that they can rely on and aspire to. But that's not going to apply to all humans all the time. So, these are covering laws. It could be that some people are just wired differently and, in fact, do progress better to skill in conditions that would be utterly toxic to that for most human beings most of the time. That's another reason why I'd want that data.
Yeah, although I always feel, I don't know who it was, Dr. Johnson said patriotism is the last refuge of scoundrels. I tend to think the same about data. Whenever people on the show talk, well, I don't have the data, it means they don't actually know the answer to the question. Although, of course, the question is complicated. Well, what are we going to be doing in the age of the smart machine? Matt Beane thinks he knows. He has an important new book out. It's called The Skill Code. He's done all sorts of research reflecting his own skills on how to save human ability in an age of smart machines. I want to remind everyone that great guests like Matt are brought to us by our friends at Liberties, a brilliant new quarterly of culture and politics. I'm going to run a short feature on Liberties, and then I want to be back with Matt Beane to talk more about what distinguishes smart machines and humans in our AI age. So don't go away, anyone. We'll be back in a second.
The noise, there is nuance, insight. Liberties is not just a journal of ideas. It's a meteor of intelligent substance. It's the place to be for engaged citizens. Politics, opinion, substance. Liberties is a triumph for freedom of thought. A quarterly of urgency, of cultural exploration, of intellectual delight, of immaculate prose. It's invaluable. Subscribe now or find Liberties at your favorite bookseller.
And you can subscribe to Liberties at libertiesjournal.com. We're speaking with Matt Beane, the author of The Skill Code, How to Save Human Ability in an Age of Intelligent Machines. Matt, one of the cliches about the difference between humans and machines is that machines can't be empathetic. The E word is very popular these days. What's your take on that? Is empathy essential to what you call the skill code?
Bonds of trust and respect are, and in many cases that involves empathy, but you can establish a bond of trust and respect without much of that. The other thing to say very quickly about technology and empathy right now, especially with all the AI on the street, is that what seems to be of consequence is that the technology can behave in a way as if it had empathy. That is a very different thing And by the way, not always, not even
And humans,
often.
of course, are good at that too.
Exactly right. It is an important lesson about style and substance, really, or sizzle and steak. You pick your metaphor. However, for durable relationships that do, in fact, cultivate bonds of trust and respect, trust is the operative word there. Trust comes in because you need to find out over time that someone's behavior is reliably so. And this includes empathy. Empathy you can demonstrate in a moment, in a brief interaction. And it can have great consequence, incredible, world-changing consequence, actually. But for you to progress towards skill, this needs to be persistent. You might have a reasonably short-lived interaction with an expert if you're a novice trying to come up and build some skill. People often refer to mentor-mentee relationships as an example of what I'm talking about. But those are pretty rare, actually. It's pretty rare for us to have very long-standing relationships with a senior mentor that kind of go beyond the bounds of work. That's a mentorship. But even in a short-lived one where you and I just have, say, a project to do together, lasts a day sometimes. Even in that day, if you're someone that I look up to, if I can sense that I want to learn how to do what you're doing, and I want to earn your trust and respect as somebody who's trying hard, and you in turn see me as someone who cares and is trying to do better, that bond of trust and respect really becomes integral to, I try hard, you watch, in 15 minutes later, you decide, okay, try this now. You know, and you give me that next leg up such that by the end of the day, I've earned both your trust and respect and built my skill. So empathy there is you're sensing my interest, willingness, ability, eagerness to build my skill and career and do better, but also earn your trust and respect. It's sort of feeling with me on that because you've been there. And that's part of what's going to drive you to even be there to support me, right? You need practical help. Fine. That's part of the reason that experts enroll novices often. But there's also an emotional component for sure.
Do you subscribe to the Gladwell law? And I don't know what it is, 1,000, 2,000, 10,000 hours to become skillful in anything. Is that what being human is? I mean, Gladwell, of course, his work in this area isn't focused as much on AI as you, but are you in that camp?
Well, certainly, here's one thing I kind of readily agree, and the book, in fact, if you look at the research in the book, is very aligned with his claims. That 10,000 hour number has since been questioned in a number of fruitful ways, I think. But the research on focused, effective practice is unified and decades long. Kai Erikson's a famous psychologist who's recently passed away. Perhaps did the lion's share of the psychological research in that domain, but it's just patently obvious you need to do a lot of practice to get superb at something. But how that practice is structured matters a great deal. And there is I'll just say, there is one way in which the sort of 10,000 hours view of expertise is problematic for a healthy view of skill. And this is encapsulated in the second C of the skill code around complexity. So we think of this as a nice way of trotting out this theory about skill, which is pick one thing, practice it hard for 10,000 hours, and you'll be playing Liszt or Chopin after that 10,000 hours, right? It's not false, it's just incomplete. The missing bit is for you to be a skilled pianist and play that piece after, lots of practice and do it reliably under pressure. What's the under pressure bit? That could be a cow walking in the back of the theater, or it could be discovering that you're not getting paid on time. These are surprises that don't have to do with playing the piano per se. They have to do with the complexity of the work environment.
So Matt, there seems to be two broad approaches in terms of making sure that we have value in the age of the smart machine. On the one hand, it's the pivot you just talked about, our ability to invent and reinvent ourselves, with the cow in the back of the room, the cow, of course, being OpenAI and these other algorithms that replace us. And on the other hand, the approach seems to be to drill down more and more and become more and more of an expert in what we do. So going back to the plumber or the attorney or the surgeon, should the plumber be preparing themselves for a post-plumbing world, or should plumbers become such expert plumbers that the smart machine will never be able to touch them, and they're always going to have value and have a job and meaning in their lives?
Yes, it's not obvious to me either one of those realities is necessary or even all that likely. So I'm not trying to be coy. Here's the one thing that I think we can count on. All of us can. The stats and sort of predictive models in this are very clear. Most of us, in fact, almost all of humanity is not going to lose their job as a result of AI, unless we get dramatic expansion in its capability in the time and space and so on. Putting that possibility aside, which I grant is a possibility, if people will lose a year in the US, say, but hundreds of millions of human beings very quickly are going to have to change how they do their job. The plumber, perfect example. Maybe not as much as somebody who does remote work and deals with digital documents all day long, because of course AI right now doesn't have a body, and I would say it won't in any comprehensive way for quite some time. But that plumber's definitely, as of like 1 year ago, changing how they do their job. Where do their invoices come from? What about notes to clients? They're using ChatGPT or its equivalent. And so what this means is that we all have to learn. So the power move is reinventing yourself is quite strong. It's more like, how is it that you build that new skill to handle the new way of doing things in your job? You've just got to get better at that. Predicting what that next skill is important, sure, but it's a little folly because we don't know. Nobody really knows how the world of work is going to change in particular, but we do know change is happening faster and for more people and in broader ways. So getting good at that new skill is the new superpower.
And then who should be most worried, Matt? Is it blue-collar workers like plumbers, electricians, car mechanics, or is it highly sort of middle class or elite 20th century skill workers like surgeons, lawyers, academics like yourself?
Yeah, so I have a piece coming out on this in Harvard Business Review in some short order. I think it's a month away or something like that. The short answer is remote workers. Anybody who doesn't need to use their body to do their job, deals with information only, never needs to show up. That's the person who will most be, and I won't go into all the detail there, but their job is most subject to increasingly agentic forms of AI that can sort of...
the customer service person, sort of.
That's a good example. Also, perhaps a remote IT professional or somebody who does digital design. This isn't just low skill. There are people whose jobs are entirely remote. Blockchain engineer, very high paid person whose job in principle could be performed entirely by think of AI, but given the ability to plan, remember, and recover from mistakes.
Should I be worried, Matt? I work remotely. No one ever sees me. I may not even exist.
Entirely, right. And how do you know I exist, right?
Well, I was going to come to that. We'll come to that later. But what about myself? What should I be doing? How do I save my ability in the age of this intelligent machine where an Andrew Keene look-alike and think-alike, not that I do a lot of thinking, can be created by OpenAI or one of these other platforms?
It's a very interesting question. I don't think we have good guidance on that yet. The best sort of...
We don't have the data, Matt.
The best rough cut, the best rough cut guidance that I've heard so far is the podcaster, the thought leader, the person who could do their job remotely. That person who uses and engages with these tools in productive ways, tries to figure out how to use them, that person is going to preserve and enhance their value-adding position in the world. And the person who has that role and chooses not to use those tools is at greater risk. I think that's useful, but in some cases will be wrong. So there are some people like you, for instance, who will realize, you know what, this is all bunk. All of this AI stuff is nonsense. We're all digital, lonely, distanced. Our work has no meaning. I'm going to start to turn back to the analog world. Sure, you can keep doing your podcast, but now we're going to do physical events, get together, no phones, shut it all off. And we're just going to get together and have meaningful, interesting, high touch, interactions where you have to be there, damn it. And people are going to start to pay more for that kind of thing. And so I think that's another route for somebody in your position.
The Revenge of Analog, that book has been...
I've never heard of it. I'm going to have to go dig it up.
Already. Matt, the cliche when it comes to doctors, for example, surgeons, is that these AIs or these smart machines will be able to do the surgery, but they won't be able to hold the hand of the patient before or after the operation. When you're talking about the importance of the physical and of empathy, is that the core of it? That the smart machine, that intelligent machines can never replicate the human body?
I'll never say never. But in the relative short run, it's not just about the body. There's maybe 25 years worth of very solid research in human robot and human computer interaction that shows even if a machine can do it 100 times better, people will just prefer, trust, and engage with a human being doing it because that's what humans want. Doesn't matter how much better the tech will be, the self-driving thing, the GPS nav, what have you. And there's some domains. Safety is a good one. And concerns around life, loss of property, sort of existential risks, but also on the sort of positive side of things around intimacy, around creativity. There's just some activities where even if a human could get their emotional needs met by a chatbot partner with an avatar much better, which, by the way, these days has been shown in certain conditions, the human's just going to prefer a human. I think that's just a fact. Now, never, it's not useful to think beyond, say, 50 years from now. I could imagine 200, 500 years from now, all kinds of things. But in the short run, most definitely, people are going to be willing to pay more for and will insist upon human beings in the loop in certain things.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring in willing to pay more. And that's the real question. I was going to say the $1 billion question, to excuse the pun. But are people willing to pay extra for a server in a restaurant, a real customer support person, a real professor in a lecture hall? Do you think that humans ultimately, it seems to me as if when it comes to banks, for example, most of us, in theory, before banks became increasingly automated, most of us were said, well, we'd much rather experience a physical person in a bank. And now most of us never spend any time with any physical person in a bank because we're comfortable and trusting working with these smart machines.
Yes, exactly right. Yes. And in fact, the inverse is often true. Like that question presupposes quite an amount of privilege. Like there are many people in resource deprived contexts, countries, and so on, where they never could possibly get a surgeon to hold their hand before a procedure. In fact, a surgeon is not present within 500 miles, and they're going to get operated on by a nurse practitioner with a couple of years experience. Now, there is still a human being there, but they're not been diagnosed properly by a surgeon and hasn't had that surgeon look them in the eye and say, yes, in fact, you have this kind of cancer, and here's the plan to help you. When that billions of human beings do not have that privilege, it is not obvious to me that we should say, no, human being is the only way for you. You shall not use AI to receive anything approximating empathy, a diagnosis, or treatment. So I think there's necessity for both. And yeah, sure, and things change over time. We could get used to all kinds of services being delivered by non-human entities. Very confident of that.
Finally, Matt, you questioned whether or not I was for real, and it's a good question. Let me reverse that with you. I often ask my guests who are in the AI business, written books, or have theories about it. How can you prove? We've all watched Blade Runner, of course, which now seems more realistic than ever. At the time when it was made, it seemed science fictional. How can you prove to me and our viewers and listeners that Matt Beane is for real, a human Matt Beane, as opposed to an intelligent machine pretending to be Matt Beane?
Right, exactly. We don't. I could point to a few studies that I could make available, say, via the show notes that
well, we
show
don't have time for the studies, Matt. How would you do
Yeah.
it now as people are watching? How could you prove that you're not a machine?
Can't do it. Impossible. Because that takes meeting other people's standard for evidence as to whether or not I'm a machine or not. And it's up to them. It's not up to me. They've got a standard as to whether or not I'm a machine or not. And I could tell you things that would prove, according to science, whether or not I'm a machine, but that's irrelevant. The viewer is the decider these days. And each individual viewer has their own standard. So it's an impossible task.
Isn't that a bit worrying if you can't prove it?
On numerous fronts. Yeah, that isn't my research area, but these days, what is truth and what's provable, what's real, what's human, what's not, is much more up for grabs than it ever was before. And we have not seen anything yet, unless AI somehow comes to a screeching halt and is shut down, literally. Absolutely worrying. Fascinating from a scientific point of view, but from a political point of view, from a social point of view, from a collaboration at work point of view, from a verification and trust point of view, safety, you name it. What's real is and what's trustable and why? What's the standard that we're using to decide? That's a whole new set of problems. It's in a way thousands of years old, I suppose. It's just much more intense now.